Just being thankful is what was kind of the whole anyway. So I appreciated getting to spend time with them, but I'm glad that we're back together today. Uh, Hopefully we'll learn something together. We'll go ahead and start with speaking prompts. I'm not sure if we've done this one before. Sharing my screen. It's about your favorite memory. And oftentimes when I think of my favorite memory, I think of like my childhood. And it doesn't have to be your favorite, but just a memory, I suppose, that maybe makes you happy. But it could also be, in more recent years as an adult. It doesn't have to be when you were a child, but just a chance to get to practice your English, to get to speak, get to share. There's so many memories, right? Everybody has. But when I was thinking about this prompt, I was thinking about when I was a little kid, I would visit my grandma, uh, and we would watch this little TV show. I didn't watch TV when I was a kid, but at my grandma's house, we were allowed to watch TV. And it was like this little Mother Goose rhymes. You guys know about like Mother Goose poems and rhymes essentially? It's like very common in the US anyways. Little like most kids know Mother Goose rhymes. It's like this treasury, this book full of poetry for kids. Um and there was like this little show about it on the TV. Anyways, it's like these little songs and these little poems, and we just thought it was so cool. And the other day, since my grandparents were over at my house, they were saying something about some rhyme and poem I had never heard before. And they were like, how can you not know this? Wasn't this part of your Mother Goose like poem show? And I was like, no, I've never heard this. I can't remember what the poem was. It was some very old something I had never heard. Anyways, that got me thinking about it. It was fun to spend time with my grandma as a little kid. She's a good grandma. Is there anyone who'd like to start out sharing something that has happened to you that makes you happy? And when did it happen? Why is it special to you? What makes it memorable? It could be in your childhood, it could be in more recent years. So, anyone who'd like to start?
Okay, me.
Yeah.
Yes, if you ask me, I would say about my childhood. Like since I was elementary school, like I have no worries to spend my time like in this years and like go to school and talk with friends and learn teaching and like we have no worry to about like what would happen our future. Uh, but now like I have been worrying about my future like that.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Yes.
I understand. As you become an adult, you realize the world is not such an idyllic place as it is when you're a child. Yes, I understand. Would anyone else like to share? You're just sharing a memory that you have that's maybe special to you or makes you happy or smile. You can be from your childhood or in more recent years. And if nobody else wants to share, that's all right too. I just like to give the option. Yes. Is it Ongheim?
Yes, I'll hang with teacher.
Oh,
Okay.
Ongheim. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. By the way, let me introduce myself. I'm the new participant in the session. Yeah. Yeah. I think the memorable memory in my childhood. I think maybe when I was the 19 years old. Now I'm 23 years. I think
Mhm.
I'm from Rakhine, and me and my family in going to the we are going to the Miao. The Miao is our Asian city. There's a lot of the Asian pagoda and the Asian debating. Yeah, I think it is on December. Yeah, it is it was very the memorable memory for me. Yeah, that is. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. I heard just the last part of it because my computer froze, and so I didn't hear the beginning part. But that's okay. It sounds like you got to do some traveling and got to see the city there. So thank you for sharing. Yes. Is there anyone else who'd like to share?
Hi,
Yeah.
I'm
Hello.
new here. Yeah, I'm new here. May I introduce myself? I'm
Yes.
Asian, but you can call me Bill. My favorite memory, I think it was when I was 5 or 4 when I go to Mandalay, and my aunties are from Mandalay, my father's from Mandalay, so we travel to Mandalay and we like go to vacation with our relatives. And when I got there, I have a cousin brother who is older than me, and we had little turtles in our house in a big yard, and then we used to play with them. We used to make them like soup. Those were my favorite and the most sweetest memories of my life.
Uh-huh. That's so special. I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I find most of the good memories come from the people that you're with. Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Mhm. Anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you to those who shared. Always love getting to hear your stories about your lives. Moving over to our article, I don't believe that we have read it yet. I certainly hope we have not. It's about globalization. Have any of you guys studied globalization at all?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know a lot about it personally. I know some about it. But I'm not an expert. So some of you might have even more information than I. But it looked like hopefully there would be some interesting vocabulary related to the world in general and then related to economic subject matter specifically. So we'll read through it and then we'll go back through and talk about vocabulary or concepts or context or any questions that you have. It says globalization. What globalization? This sounds like maybe that's supposed to be emphasis. Like it or not, globalization is here to stay. The question is not should it continue, but how can it work for everyone? So it's just saying here that there's the red words are going to be words that might be more unusual or unfamiliar just in general, and the blue ones are economic domain specific words that are specifically about economics or those types of things. Anyways, I'm sure that they can also have general meanings as well. It says, mention the word globalization and you are likely to get a reaction. Globalization, the creation of a new world economic system dominated by huge corporations and the G8 nations, is an idea that has its fervent supporters and its bitter opponents. For its opponents, globalization is seen as a system designed to impose the American economic model on the whole world for the sole benefit of the USA and a few other rich countries. For its supporters, globalization is the way forward to a better world where everyone will ultimately be better off than they are today. Globalization is a process about which both supporters and opponents can justify some of their arguments. Yet, in spite of the hopes of many of its critics, there is one thing about which there can no longer be any doubt. Globalization is not a future development that we can accept or reject. It is a process that has already largely taken place, and it is one from which, in all but the most catastrophic future scenarios, there can be no going back. The other day in Paris, I attended an international symposium on globalization that brought together politicians and economists, economists, diplomats, academics, trade unionists, and representatives of humanitarian agencies. Economists, thank you. There were speakers from Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas, from Umberto Eco, former French Foreign Minister Bernard Kouchner, and Harvard economist. Sorry, I don't know how to say that word clearly. Economist, Jeffrey Sachs. Each had his or her own specific views, but there was one thing on which every speaker agreed: the fact that globalization is here to stay. As French trade union leader Nicole Notat put it, the market economy is certainly the best system that exists. In many ways, there is nothing new about globalization. It is a process that began to spread some 300 years ago when European nations, and Britain in particular, developed an economic system that depended on international trade. Spices, sugar, tea, and coffee were among the first commodities that were traded globally. By 1850, Britain, the most developed nation at the time, had an economy that was dependent for its survival on global trade. Unable to feed its growing population, the country was importing 25% of its basic food, most of it from America and the British Empire, and even if Britain was at the time far ahead of the other nations in the globalization of its economy, other countries such as France and the United States were already moving strongly in the same direction. Without the globalization of trade, no nation would have been able to achieve its current state of development, for no nation in the world, not even the USA, can supply to all its own needs in raw materials, products, or services. Over the last 2 centuries, thanks to this process, living standards have increased dramatically in most parts of the world. Yet this huge improvement has not benefited every nation equally, and there are indeed some parts of the world where living standards have actually declined. In 1820, the difference in wealth between the people in the world's poorest nations and those in the world's richest nations was about 3 to 1. Today is about 30 to 1. It is this flagrant inequality resulting from globalization that is unacceptable to so many people. Nonetheless, it would be quite wrong to suggest that globalization only benefits the nations of the world that are already rich. In the last 50 years, a whole group of nations, including China and India, the world's 2 most populated states, have benefited massively from the advantages of globalization, not to mention oil-rich states like the Emirates or Dubai. In the 1990s, 18 out of 20 of the fastest growing economies in the world were in the developing world. Only 2 were Western countries. In the 1990s, the Chinese economy, thanks to a huge development of international trade, grew by a massive average of 10.7% per year, bringing jobs and a sharp rise in living standards to millions of people. Without globalization, where would they be? By contrast, over the same period, the economy of Switzerland, one of the world's richest nations, grew by just 0.6% per year. In the end, therefore, the question is not to globalize or not to globalize. It is a matter of finding ways to make sure that the riches of tomorrow's global economy are spread more equitably across the world. It is not going to be easy. For instance, there is a large degree of popular consensus in developed countries that the third world debt, a vicious circle of poverty that condemns some of the world's poorest countries to remain poor, is an injustice that must be set right. Yet even though the first steps in this direction have already been taken, there is still a lot more to be done. Today, about 25% of the world's population live in countries that are benefiting very little or not at all from the effects of globalization. Countries like Chad or Myanmar. Hey, look, your guys' country is named in here. That's cool. Countries that are often hard to reach and even harder to live in. Until recently, these countries were largely left to their own devices, left to sink further into poverty. One man who understood this well was bin Laden, who, though coming personally from a rich family that had benefited massively from globalization, recruited his Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters from the ranks of those that had been left out: Afghans, poor Pakistanis, Chechens, and even Burmese. Paradoxically, both for himself and for the developed world, bin Laden's terror campaign may prove to be the event that reinforces globalization rather than destroying it, notably because of the dramatic way in which it has highlighted the dangers of the growing gap between rich nations and poor ones. There is one feasible way of addressing this problem, and that is to involve the world's poorer countries more closely in the growing economy. It will have to happen because the consequences of failure in this matter will benefit no country. Bin Laden wanted to destroy America with it and with it the global economy. Yet were the global economy to collapse, it would not be the world's richest nations that suffer most. It would be the world's poorer and poorest nations. There is no doubt that is no doubt the most compelling general argument in favor of continuing globalization. The most compelling argument against globalization in its current form concerns the nature of the economic forces that are at work. One of the 100 largest players in today's world economy, 49 are nations, but 51 are multinational corporations, unelected bodies whose interests can sometimes be very different from those of the people of countries in which they operate. The task that now faces world leaders is finding the best way to control future developments for the greatest benefit of the greatest number of people. It is also, perhaps more importantly, to do so in an environmentally sustainable way. Tomorrow's world economy will continue to be global, but it must be green too. These two targets are not incompatible with each other, quite the reverse, they are intimately connected. Okay, hopefully there is some interesting vocabulary for you. You guys know kind of how this works. You can ask any question, feel free to just unmute. It can be about what a word means or how it could be used in a different sentence or just a question about the context, etc. Whatever you are wondering about. Let's go ahead and do this section here. It says, mention the word globalization and you are likely to get a reaction. Globalization, the creation of a new world economic system dominated by huge corporations in the G8 nations, is an idea that has its fervent supporters and its bitter opponents. For its opponents, globalization is seen as a system designed to impose the American economic model on the whole world for the sole benefit of the USA and a few other rich countries. Excuse me. For its supporters, globalization is the way forward to a better world, where everyone will ultimately be better off than they are today. Globalization is a process about which both supporters and opponents can justify some of their arguments. Yet, in spite of the hopes of many of its critics, there is one thing about which there can no longer be any doubt. Globalization is not a future development that we can accept or reject. It is a process that has already largely taken place, and it is one from which in all but the most catastrophic future scenarios, there can be no going back. All right, any questions from this section?
Okay, I know the word fervent.
Did you say fervent?
Yes.
Yes. I need to be able to see it. Here it is. Fervent supporters, like really dedicated and passionate. It looks like they define it as well down here. Fervent, very keen, just like very interested, very passionate, hardworking. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm. What else?
Teacher, may I know chord of it? Yeah.
Are you saying economic?
Economic, yeah.
Economic, okay. So the economy is like how a state or a nation or it sounds like even corporation, but like usually it's a state or nation or government or like country like handles its money essentially, like its goods and services and how it like gets those things and sells those things. All of that is the economic system. And so that's what it's referring by economic. I don't know if they define it better down here or not. I don't think that they do. Oh wait, maybe it's here. Economic model, economic system. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I thought someone said something. So that's what it's referring to, is that economy of the goods and services that you're buying and selling, and the money that's coming in and the money that's going out. All of that system of how the world is run is economy, or the economic system, or a model.
Thank you,
And there's
teacher.
different ways that people like set it up. Yeah.
Yes, the word catastrophic future scenarios.
Catastrophic means like terrible, deadly, life altering, like a tornado, a hurricane is catastrophic. Like a catastrophe is the noun. A catastrophe is like everything has gone terribly wrong, and it's really, really difficult to come back from that. So where I live, we get lots of tornadoes, and that's catastrophic. It like destroys whole cities, and they have to be rebuilt, probably like typhoons, hurricanes, that kind of stuff would be is like catastrophic. It would destroy like a whole city. So that's what it's referring to. So it's just saying globalization would happen, and the only thing that would stop it at this point is if there was some crazy catastrophe in the future that like changed the whole world, right? Like there was a nuclear bomb or something, like, yeah.
So, what about scenarios?
Yes, scenario is like an event that could happen. Usually it's like a made up, sort of like this could happen. What if that happened? A scenario is like an event. So like a tornado, right? That's an event that happens, or a typhoon is an event that happens, or a nuclear bomb would be like a scenario, an event that happens. Yeah. But typically scenario is used in the context of it hasn't yet happened, but it's sort of made up to make a point or to prove a point. Yeah. To give an example.
Oh, thank you.
Good questions. Anything else? I was gonna say, just so you guys know, in writing, like right here where it says, there is one thing about which there can no longer be any doubt. Saying about which is just kind of redundant. You don't really need to say both those words. It's fine. Like as an English speaker, I understand that, but it's just not great. It sounds strange to the English ear. And so you would really probably want to say like, there's one thing which can no longer be any doubt, or there's one thing that there can no longer be any doubt. And they're saying about which because you're not supposed to put a preposition at the end of a word, and so they're putting it in the, or at the end of a sentence, so they're putting it in the middle, but it just doesn't sound very proper. You'd probably want to reword that whole sentence to say something like uh nobody can doubt any longer that globalization exists. Like you'd probably just want to reword that whole sentence so that you're not having to put this preposition in this weird spot in the middle, since it's not supposed to go at the end of sentences. So just gonna throw that out. It's fine, but to me that's not the best way to write. Okay. We will do this little section here. It says, the other day in Paris, I attended an international symposium on globalization that brought together politicians and economists. It's economist. For some reason, that doesn't sound right to me, but diplomats, academics, trade unionists, and representatives of humanitarian agencies. There were speakers from Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas, including Umberto Eco, former French foreign minister, Bernard Kouchner, I don't know how to say his last name, I'm sorry, and Harvard economist. Some words are hard for me, you guys. Jeffrey Sachs. Each had his or her own specific views, but there is one thing on which every speaker agreed: the fact that globalization is here to stay. As French trade union leader Nicole Notats put it, the market economy is certainly the best system that exists. Okay, any questions here?
Like I want to know about like minister. I
Yes.
have like prime minister,
Foreign
but
minister.
now
Okay, this is like a government official, in particular in charge of like foreign affairs, how their country interacts with other countries. Did you hear that? Because I was just frozen.
yes, I had
Okay. What else?
so you mean like foreign minister is like French prime minister, right?
Yes, but not necessarily the prime minister, because the prime minister would be like in charge of all of the government. He would be the government official in charge of foreign affairs, like how France works with other countries. So he'd be in charge of how France's relations with foreign nations. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And also like symposium.
Yeah. Let's see if they define it easily. A symposium is like a conference sort of where like all these smart people get together and share their knowledge. Symposium. Why can't I see it? Maybe they don't have it down here. Is it here? I don't see symposium. Oh, maybe it's down here. Symposium. Oh, conference. That's just how they define it. Yeah, it's conference where you get to share all your smarts. From the chat asking what a trade unionist is. Like trading is about like, isn't it about stocks? Commerce is what they're saying. Labor union, organization of workers. I see. So I guess trade unionist is referring to like um people have trades, right? And so they can be welders, or they can drill wells, or they can work in a factory, or they can, build parts for airplanes or whatever, right? Everybody has these trades. It's like their jobs, what they do. And in some countries anyways, they will create unions, and those unions are essentially groups of people who are able to make rules and like help the government make laws that protect the people in those jobs so that they get like fair wages and they're protected, like safe on the job, and they have like their employers follow um like the law of how their work environment should be. uh and so those unions are able to like set up all these rules to try and keep their workers safe. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not, uh but that's what it's referring to.
Like humanitarian.
Humanitarian is someone who like works in like a helping profession. So like if there's a huge catastrophe, right? If there's like a hurricane or something, right? Then humanitarians will go and they'll like be essentially like give rescue work, right? Food and water and help with the wreckage and that kind of stuff. Humanitarians can also work in like, go to a place where maybe there's a certain type of disease that has broken out, right? And they have, medical skills. And so they will work to help curb that disease and stop that disease, right? So it's essentially people who work with humans, right? It's a humanitarian to help humans in a society. Yeah. Anything else? This definition of academics is not like studying math and English and science. It's referring to like a person who studies academics. Okay. Keep moving on. Let's do these two paragraphs here. It says, in many ways, there's nothing new about globalization. It is a process that began to spread some 300 years ago when European nations, and Britain in particular, developed an economic system that depended on international trade. Spices, sugar, tea, and coffee were among the first commodities that were traded globally. By 1850, Britain, the most developed nation at the time, had an economy that was dependent for its survival on global trade. Unable to feed its growing population, the country was importing 25% of its basic food, most of it from America and the British Empire. And even if Britain was at the time far ahead of other nations in the globalization of its economy, other countries such as France and the United States were already moving strongly in the same direction. Without the globalization of trade, no nation would have been able to achieve its current state of development. For no nation in the world, not even the USA, can supply all its own needs in raw materials, products, or services. Any questions here?
It has
Yeah.
commodity.
Yes,
Commodity.
commodity. They might have a better definition than I can't remember which. Yeah, raw materials, the products of nature or agriculture. It's like supplies essentially. And it can be on like a large scale of like you know, food, or a commodity would be like if you need like paper, or like something on a large scale, or like maybe a car factory needs like these specific parts. But then it can also be on like a small scale of like things that you need in your house, to live your life. It's essentially like supplies to live or to create something. Anything else? Okay, let's keep going. We'll do these two paragraphs here. It says, without the globalization of trade, no nation would have been able to achieve its current state of development, for no nation in the world, not even the USA, can supply all its own needs in raw materials. Oh, I already read that. We'll do this two sections here. You'll have to laugh at my tired brain. It says, over the last 2 centuries, thanks to this process, living standards have increased dramatically in most parts of the world. Yet this huge improvement has not benefited every nation equally. And there are indeed some parts of the world where living standards have actually declined. In 1820, the difference in wealth between the people in the world's poorest nations and those in the world's richest nations was about 3 to 1. Today, it is about 30 to 1. This it is this flagrant inequality resulting from globalization that is unacceptable to so many people. Nonetheless, it would be quite wrong to suggest that globalization only benefits the nations of the world that are already rich. In the last 50 years, a whole group of nations, including China and India, the world's two most populated states, have benefited massively from the advantages of globalization, not to mention oil-rich states like the Emirates or Dubai. In the 1990s, 18 out of 20 of the fastest growing economies in the world were in the developing world. Only 2 were Western countries. In the 1990s, the Chinese economy, thanks to a huge development of international trade, grew by a massive average of 10.7% per year, bringing jobs and a sharp rise in living standards to millions of people. Without globalization, where would they be? By contrast, over the same period, the economy of Switzerland, one of the world's richest nations, grew by just 0.6% per year. Any questions here?
Teacher, fragrant.
Let me look that one up. I was looking at that. Flagrant, sharp, very visible. Yeah. Yeah, like really obvious. Nobody could miss it. And kind of like, flagrant, like, it has sort of this like appalling feeling to it. Like, how can this be? Yeah. Like shocking. From the chat, by contrast, let me find where it says that. Oh, down here. By contrast, with the same period of time. So to contrast means to like to notice the differences or to say how something is different. And so this phrase is just saying, this previous paragraph is saying that these poor or developing nations have like grew a bunch because of globalization. Their economies grew a lot, but by contrast or in difference, right, that a difference compared to these other nations is one of the richest nations didn't grow very much at all. And so it's just saying like as opposed to, or the opposite of, that it is different than the previous paragraph. To compare means to say how things are similar, and to contrast is to say how things are different.
Teacher,
Yeah.
I want to note the words that nonetheless and nevertheless has the same meaning.
Nevertheless, nonetheless, yeah. Because never and none mean sort of the same thing, right? It's never going to happen, or there is nothing, right? There's none of something. And so, yeah, nonetheless, I don't know which one's more common. Nevertheless, nonetheless, I don't know. It's probably very interchangeable. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, teacher.
Good question. Anything else? Okay, we'll keep going along. Let's do this section here. It says, in the end, therefore, the question is not to globalize or not to globalize. It is a matter of finding ways to make sure that the riches of tomorrow's global economy are spread more equitably across the world. It is not going to be easy. For instance, there's a large degree of popular consensus in developed countries that the third world debt, the vicious circle of poverty that condemns some of the world's poorest countries to remain poor, is an injustice that must be set right. Yet, even though the first steps in this direction have already been taken, there is still a lot more to be done. Today, about 20%, 25% of the world's population lives in countries that are benefiting very little or not at all from the effects of globalization. Countries like Chad or Myanmar, countries that are often hard to reach and even harder to live in. Until recently, these countries were largely left to their own devices, left to sink further into poverty. One man who understood this well, was bin Laden, who, though coming personally from a rich family that had benefited massively from globalization, recruited his Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters from the ranks of those who had been left out: Afghans, poor Pakistanis, Chechens, even Burmese. I think it's very interesting that your country is mentioned. I don't know if you would agree or disagree with this author. I have no idea if they're correct or not. But maybe there's some interesting vocabulary that we can talk about. Any questions here?
The sentence, these countries were largely left to their own devices. Like, what does it mean?
I'm trying to find where it says that. These countries were largely left to their own.
Oh, second paragraph.
Oh,
like
got
the
it.
third line.
Okay, thank you. That took me too long. Until recently, these countries were largely left to their own devices. Got it. That just means like they are left alone to do their own thing, right? They're not bothered. They're just kind of ignored to do their own thing. People aren't telling them what to do, step by step. They probably define it down here, it looks like. Is it this one? Yeah, forgotten, left without help. It's not usually used in the context of forgotten. It's more that people aren't worried or concerned, and so they let them do their own thing. So I guess maybe sometimes you can use it in the context of forgotten, but like a lot of times it'll be like you left your children to their own devices and maybe they got in trouble or something, or they weren't able to, like, because little kids need help with a lot of things. In this context, it's more like instead of telling these countries what they need to do step by step, we'll let them figure it out. We'll let them make their own decisions. Right. That's kind of what the phrase is saying. Yeah. From the chat was consensus. That means like agreement, that everyone agrees, or the majority of the population comes together and agrees on something. The general thought. Any other questions?
No, teacher.
Okay. We'll do this part here. Paradoxically, both for himself and for the developed world, it proved to be the event that reinforces globalization rather than destroying it, notably because of the dangers of the growing gap between rich nations and poor ones. There is only one feasible way of addressing this problem, and that is to involve more closely in on the growing economy. It will have to happen because the consequences of failure in this matter will benefit no country. Bin Laden wanted to destroy America, and with the global economy to collapse, it would not be the world's richest nations that would suffer, but the world's poorer nations and poorest nations. That is no doubt the most compelling general continuing globalization. Any
Paradoxically.
It's like juxtaposition. Paradoxically, in a manner that produces the intended result. Opposite effect of what the goal was, right? Bin Laden wanted to trying to destroy it. He helped globalization, right? And in doing that, actually helped it. Yeah. Say it again.
The meaning is a little bit difficult.
Another, yeah, another. It's the opposite result that you the opposite of what you intended to get in your goal. Paradox. A few examples where you'll like be like, oh, okay. Examples. Like it's illogical or contradictory, and yet it's true. So like there's here.
Is it like the opposite of what I expected?
Yeah.
See, thank
Yeah.
you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it seems to be contradictory, like it in fact actually is, right?
Sustainable.
Yes, to be means that, oh, my brain has stopped working. Where is
Before the
down
lesson.
here? Thank you. Sustainable means that like says, or it resupplies its own resources. Up here, environmentally sustainable. Oh, green is just what they say. Yeah, sustainable just means that it like when you use the resource, it resupplies the resource, and when you use it again, it resupplies the resource. So